Years after being abandoned while pregnant, she attended her ex's wedding. And when she walked in hand with their son, silence fell over the church. The grand doors of the church swung open with a slow, solemn creak, a sound that echoed through the reverent silence of the hall and turned every head. It wasn't the bride arriving. It was Olivia Thompson, and by her hand walked a 7-year-old boy whose big brown eyes were an exact copy of the groom's eyes standing at the altar. The murmur that followed was like the buzz of a disturbed beehive, a shockwave that rippled from the front pews to the last row, where the less important guests craned their necks to see. Michael Reynolds, the groom, froze. His jaw locked, the rehearsed smile melting into a mask of pale panic. Beside him, the bride, Isabella, furrowed her brow, confusion clouding her perfectly made-up face. She didn't understand, but Michael did. He understood perfectly. That ghost from his past wasn't just there. It was materialized hand in hand with the living proof of a broken promise, a cowardly abandonment. And in that instant, under the gaze of hundreds, he knew his perfect day had turned into a courtroom. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand the magnitude of that silence, the density of the tension that filled the sacred air of that church, we need to go back 8 years to a cold autumn morning in a small, dimly lit apartment in Chicago where it all really began. But first, give this a thumbs up to help our channel. Thanks. Olivia was 22 and holding a positive pharmacy test in her trembling hands. The white plastic seemed to weigh a ton, a small object with the power to redefine her entire future. She and Michael had been together for almost 3 years, a college romance that blossomed between law books and shared dreams. He was the rising star, the future brilliant lawyer, with a last name that opened doors and an ambition that burned like fire. She, a student in aesthetics and cosmetology, was his anchor, the calm in his world of frantic ambition. They talked about marriage, about a house with a backyard, about baby names that sounded good with Reynolds. They were promises whispered in the dark, sweet and comforting. That morning, Olivia believed that little blue line on the test was just accelerating a future that was already written. She prepared a special breakfast, placed the test in a velvet box that once held a necklace, and waited for him to wake up, her heart pounding with a mix of panic and euphoria. When Michael finally opened his eyes, the morning sun barely touched the room. He saw the tray, her nervous smile, and his first reaction was a sleepy grin. "What are we celebrating?" he asked, his voice hoarse from sleep. Olivia pushed the box toward him. His smile faltered when he opened it. He didn't see a future. He saw an obstacle, an unplanned detour in his meticulously charted path to success. The silence that settled in that room was different from the silence in the church years later. It was a cold, clinical silence, the sound of a dream shattering. "This can't be real," he said, and there was no joy in his voice, only denial. "Michael, we're going to be parents," she whispered, trying to inject the magic she felt into the words, but they sounded hollow in the vacuum he'd created. He got out of bed, pulled on his pants and walked to the window, his back to her. "I can't, Olivia. Not now." The sentence was delivered with cutting finality. He was in his final year of law school, with a guaranteed internship at the most prestigious firm in the city, a path paved by his family. A child, a rushed marriage, weren't part of the plan. What followed were days of conversations that felt more like negotiations. Michael didn't talk about us. He talked about options. He used legal terms as if discussing a problematic contract, not the life they'd created. "There are ways to handle this, Olivia. Discreetly." The word abortion hung between them, never spoken but always present, heavy and ugly. For Olivia, that wasn't an option. It was the denial of a life, the erasure of a love she believed was real. The final argument was the most brutal. He accused her of trying to trap him, of using the pregnancy as a snare to secure a comfortable future. "You think I don't know what you want? You think I'm an idiot?" he spat, his face twisted with anger and fear. "I want the father of my child," she replied, tears finally streaming hot and bitter. "I want the man who promised me a future." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "People say things, Olivia. Grow up." That night he packed his bags. He left an envelope of cash on the kitchen table. It wasn't a gesture of care, it was a payoff, a settlement, an attempt to turn an emotional responsibility into a financial transaction. He walked out the door and didn't look back, leaving behind a 22-year-old woman pregnant with a shattered heart and an envelope of money that seemed to burn her skin. The humiliation was the first wave to hit her. She felt naive, stupid. His promises echoed in her mind, now tinged with mockery. She told her parents, a simple, hard-working couple who took her in with a mix of disappointment and unconditional love. Her father, a man of few words, just said, "A child is a blessing, no matter how they come, we'll figure it out." And they did. Olivia clung to that promise with the strength of someone drowning. The pain of abandonment was an open wound, but the life growing inside her was a purpose. She finished her course, her swollen hands barely holding the tools, the pitying looks from some classmates a silent torture. She ignored it all. Focused on the future, a future that now only included two people, her and her son. When Alex was born, on a rainy spring afternoon, Olivia's world reconfigured. Holding that tiny being in her arms, all the noise of the past silenced. Michael's face, his cruel words, the door closing, it all vanished. There was only her son's scent, the warmth of his skin against hers. In that moment, she made a silent promise. She wouldn't be a victim. She'd be a fortress. And her son would never ever feel the lack of anything, especially the love that had been denied him before he was even born. Olivia Thompson's reconstruction wasn't an act of revenge, but of survival. It was a slow, painful process, built brick by brick on the ruins of her broken heart. Olivia Thompson's reconstruction wasn't an act of revenge, but of survival. It was a slow, painful process, built brick by brick on the ruins of her broken heart. The first months were a blur of sleepless nights, diapers, and a fatigue that seeped into her bones, so deep she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The pain of Michael's abandonment was still an open wound, throbbing quietly in the quietest hours of the night, when she held little Alex and wondered how anyone could just turn their back on that perfect life. The money he'd left, she stashed away untouched in an old box. It was dirty money, a symbol of her humiliation, and she swore to herself she'd never need it. That envelope became a silent fuel for her determination, a constant reminder of what she needed to overcome. She lived in a small room at the back of her parents' house, a space that barely fit her and Alex's crib, but it was a sanctuary of safety and unconditional love. Her mother, a woman of quiet strength, would take the baby so Olivia could finish her cosmetology course, her eyes conveying a clear message. "You're not alone in this." The graduation was a bittersweet milestone, while her classmates celebrated with boyfriends and fiancés, planning futures together. Olivia crossed the stage with her diploma in hand and a heart heavy with responsibility, but also light with new purpose. She was no longer the girl dreaming of a fairy tale romance. She was a mother, a provider, a woman forged in adversity. With the diploma in hand and a small family loan, she turned her parents' garage into a modest beauty salon. The smell of fresh paint and sawed wood mixed with the scent of baby powder. It was her refuge, her battlefield. At first, clients were few, neighbors, her mum's friends, women who came more out of solidarity than need. But Olivia had innate talent. Her hands, which once trembled holding a pregnancy test, now moved with impressive confidence and precision. She didn't just cut hair or paint nails, she listened. Her little salon became a confessional, a place where neighborhood women shared their own stories of broken hearts, silent struggles, and daily small victories. Olivia absorbed it all, and each story strengthened her, making her feel part of an invisible sisterhood of women who, like her, refused to break. Meanwhile, Michael Reynolds' name started appearing in the local society columns. Young legal prodigy, heir to the renowned Reynolds & Associates firm, a staple at the city's most buzzed-about events. The photos showed him always smiling, whiskey glass in hand, surrounded by powerful people and stunning women. Each photo was a stab to Olivia's chest. He seemed so distant, so untouchable, living in a parallel universe where she and Alex didn't exist. The life he'd discarded so easily hadn't left a single scratch on his upward trajectory. He wasn't a man haunted by a cruel decision. He was a man thriving in its absence. That realization hurt more than the abandonment itself. It wasn't about the money or status. It was about the complete and total erasure of her existence in his life. To the world and to himself, it was as if she'd never happened. Alex grew, and with him, Olivia's need to protect herself and him from Michael's shadow. The boy was his father's mirror image, with the same expressive brown eyes and the same stubborn way of furrowing his brow when concentrating. The questions inevitably started. "Mum, why don't I have a dad like Jake?" he asked one day, with the brutal innocence only a 5-year-old possesses. Olivia had rehearsed that answer in her mind hundreds of times. She knelt, looked into his eyes, and said with the calmest voice she could muster, "My love, some families are different. Ours is me and you. And that's all we need, because our love is big enough for two." She never spoke ill of Michael to her son. She didn't paint him as a monster or a villain. She simply omitted him, creating a narrative where their love was so complete there was no room for anyone else. It was a white lie, an armor she built around her son's heart, hoping it was strong enough to shield him from the truth. The years passed, and the little garage salon flourished. Olivia's reputation grew beyond the neighborhood. Her talent, discretion, and empathy made her one of the most sought-after stylists in the city. Women from high society, wives of lawyers and businessmen, started frequenting her new upscale salon in downtown Chicago, a space she'd built with her own sweat and sleepless nights. She heard the names, the gossip, the dramas of the elite that Michael was part of. She heard about his courtroom successes, his travels, his fleeting girlfriends. And then she started hearing about Isabella. Isabella was the daughter of an influential judge, a woman described as sweet, elegant, and the perfect bride for a man like Michael Reynolds. Their engagement was announced with fanfare, a union of two powerful families. Olivia read the news with a strange sense of detachment, like reading about characters in a book. The sharp pain had turned into a numb scar, a part of her that no longer bled when touched. She became a fortress, just as she'd promised herself. At 30, Olivia Thompson was an independent woman, a successful entrepreneur, a devoted mother. She didn't need anyone. Her life was full, filled with Alex's laughter, the buzz of her salon, the satisfaction of building her own empire from the ashes of a love that betrayed her. She rarely thought of Michael, and when she did, it was with cold indifference, the indifference of looking at a stranger. The past was buried, sealed, and she had no intention of exhuming it. She'd won. She'd built a happy life not to spite him, but despite him, and that was the sweetest victory of all. She didn't know, however, that the past wasn't dead. It was just dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge, not as a ghost, but as a reckoning that fate, in its cruel and poetic irony, had already begun to orchestrate. The living proof of her overcoming her son was also the living proof of his abandonment, and that duality was about to collide in the most public and devastating way possible. Olivia Thompson's reconstruction was a silent work of art, sculpted not in marble, but in the raw material of human resilience. The years following Alex's birth weren't just about surviving, but about the meticulous task of building a life so full and radiant that the shadow of abandonment became insignificant. She rose from the ashes not with the fury of a phoenix, but with the silent tenacity of a flower blooming through concrete. Each day was a brick laid in the foundation of her new identity. The garage salon, initially an act of desperation, became her alchemy lab. There she didn't just transform her clients' appearances, but transmuted her own pain into strength. The conversations that flowed amid the snip of scissors and the hum of dryers were her therapy. She learned that her story, though felt as unique and isolating, was an echo of countless others. There were women betrayed, underestimated, discarded. Women who, like her, had to reinvent themselves from scratch. That tacit communion nourished her, dispelling the shame Michael had etched into her soul and replacing it with a fierce, silent pride. Alex was the sun around which her universe revolved. She dedicated herself to being both mother and father, filling every empty space with superlative love. She taught him to ride a bike in the park, her heart in her throat with every wobbly pedal, her hands ready to catch the fall. She took him fishing, clumsy with the bait and hook, but laughing with him at every imaginary fish that got away. On stormy nights, she held him tight, saying thunder was just the sky bowling. She built a world for him where the absence of a father figure wasn't a lack, but simply a feature of their special family, a family of two that was stronger than many of 3 or 4. She read to him every night, stories of brave heroes and distant kingdoms, always emphasizing the strength that came from within, the magic of being good and just. In every tale, every lesson, she was subtly arming her son with the values his father had scorned: integrity, empathy, and the courage to face the consequences of one's choices. Financially, Olivia's rise was remarkable. Her work's reputation spread like a well-kept secret everyone wanted to share. The attention to detail, the ability to truly understand what a client meant when they said they needed a change, and the atmosphere of trust she cultivated made her name synonymous with excellence. In 4 years, she left the garage behind and opened Olivia Thompson Studio on a charming commercial street. The space was the materialization of her success, elegant, minimalist, with soft lighting that made everyone feel welcome. Her parents' loan was repaid with interest, and a thank you dinner, where their tears of pride were worth more than any amount. She hired other stylists, manicurists, estheticians, becoming not just a solo professional, but an entrepreneur, a boss who led by example. She never forgot where she came from, treating her employees with the same dignity and respect she'd craved, creating a work environment that was more a sisterhood than a hierarchy. While her small empire grew, Michael Reynolds' universe expanded in a parallel galaxy. He'd become a partner in his father's firm, his name now etched in gold letters on the brass plaque at the entrance. He was a feared and respected lawyer, known for his sharp rhetoric and ability to find loopholes others missed. He lived in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, drove an imported car, and vacationed in exotic destinations Olivia only saw in magazines. To the world, he was the embodiment of success, a man who had it all. But there was a subtle void in his life, an endless search for something he couldn't name. His relationships were superficial, transactional, with women who were more accessories to his image than partners. He traded them like he traded watches, always seeking a newer, more impressive model. None ever challenged him or saw beyond the facade of power and wealth. He was surrounded by people, but fundamentally alone. Olivia overcame Michael not by forgetting him, but by becoming indifferent to him. The acute pain of abandonment gave way to a scar that rarely ached. She learned to see news about him without the knot in her stomach. He was just a man, a closed chapter in her life, the unwitting catalyst for her transformation. She even tried dating a few times, kind and well-meaning men who admired her. But her heart, though healed, was guarded. Her priority was Alex, and the idea of introducing someone new into her perfectly built world seemed an unnecessary risk. Her happiness didn't depend on a partner. It depended on her peace, her work, her son. She was complete. The loneliness that sometimes visited her in the quiet nights after Alex slept wasn't desperate. It was contemplative, the silent price of her unyielding independence. The final proof of her overcoming came unexpectedly. One day, one of her oldest clients, a friendly and chatty lady, casually commented, "Olivia, can you believe my nephew Michael is finally getting married? About time. He's a good guy, but so focused on his career. The bride, Isabella, is such a lovely girl, from an excellent family. They make a picture-perfect couple." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine, but her face remained impassive. She continued cutting the lady's hair, her hands steady, her voice calm. "That's wonderful, I'm happy for him," she replied, the words sounding perfectly natural. In that moment she realized she'd made it. The news didn't break her. It didn't make her cry. It didn't awaken a desire for revenge. It sparked only a distant curiosity, the kind you feel learning about an old high school acquaintance's fate. His name, which once had the power to devastate her, was now just a sound. She had truly overcome it all. The past was finally in its proper place, buried and powerless over the present. She didn't imagine that an invitation, a simple piece of ornate paper, was about to arrive in the mail, a summons from fate for a reunion she never sought, but that would become inevitable. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, nestled among bills and supplier catalogues. It was a thick, expensive cream envelope with Olivia Thompson calligraphed in elegant gold ink. She opened it with distracted curiosity, assuming it was for some gala event from one of her high society clients. Inside, the card was even more opulent, with embossed letters announcing the union of Isabella Hayes and Michael Reynolds. For an instant, time stopped. The name Michael Reynolds leaped from the page, an echo of a past she believed she'd silenced forever. Her heart gave a single, painful lurch, an involuntary reaction, like a phantom limb aching years after amputation. She reread the name, then the bride's Isabella Hayes. Hayes. The surname was familiar. She searched her mind, the archive of names and connections from the city's elite. And then the piece clicked. Isabella was the sister of one of her most loyal and long-time clients, Charlotte Hayes. Charlotte was a discreet and kind woman who'd been coming to her salon for years. They'd developed a relationship bordering on friendship, a mutual respect that transcended service. Charlotte often spoke about her younger sister, the sweet Isabella, and her fiancé, a brilliant and ambitious lawyer. But she always referred to him just as Michael, just Michael. A common name, one Olivia had heard dozens of times without making any connection. The irony was so cruel it bordered on comical. For years, Olivia had been just one degree of separation from the man who'd split her life in two, hearing fragments of his new love story without ever realizing it was the continuation of the one he'd abandoned. The invitation wasn't a mistake. Charlotte, in a gesture of genuine affection, and with no idea of the devastating connection, had insisted on inviting the stylist she adored. To Charlotte, it was a simple act of inclusion. To Olivia, it was a grenade just dropped in her lap. Her first reaction was a visceral impulse to tear the invitation into 1,000 pieces, burn it, and scatter the ashes. Going to that wedding was unthinkable, a form of self-flagellation she didn't deserve. It would be like voluntarily walking into the epicenter of her oldest pain to witness the happily ever after denied to her. She'd sit in a church pew, an anonymous spectator, while he promised another woman the life he'd once promised her. The mere mental image was suffocating. She tossed the invitation into the bottom drawer of her desk, under old papers and receipts, as if physically burying it could bury the whirlwind of emotions it awakened. She tried to go on with her day, focusing on spreadsheets, schedules, the familiar scent of her studio. But the invitation pulsed in her mind, a silent and disruptive presence. That night, after Alex slept, she poured herself a glass of wine, something she rarely did. She sat in the dim light of her living room, the house's silence amplifying the chaos in her head. What bothered her wasn't the wedding itself. She'd already accepted that Michael had moved on. What disturbed her was the silent injustice of it all. He was about to celebrate his happiness in a grand event, surrounded by friends and family, receiving society's blessing for the world he'd strived so hard to belong to. His life was a straight line of successes, with no mark, no visible consequence of the trail of destruction he'd left behind. He'd built his paradise on her hell, and the world applauded him for it. Meanwhile, she, the woman he'd discarded, was invited to watch, to applaud, to validate his happiness with her silent presence. The idea was grotesque. Then a different thought began to form, subtle and dangerous. What if she went? Not for masochism, not for pathetic hopes of reconciliation, and certainly not to cause a scene. But for what then? The answer crystallized slowly in her mind. She'd go for herself. To prove to herself she could be in the same space as him and not break. To look at his face, not as the abandoned 22-year-old girl, but as the 30-year-old woman she'd become, strong and independent. It would be the final act of closure, a silent confrontation where the only person who needed to know she'd won was herself. She didn't need a scandal. Her simple presence, her calm and successful existence would be her statement. She was no longer a victim hidden in the shadows. She was Olivia Thompson, and she had every right to be anywhere she wanted. The decision, once made, brought a strange calm, but with it came another complication. Alex. The wedding was on a Saturday afternoon, and her mother, who would normally be her first choice to watch the boy, would be traveling. Leaving Alex with a babysitter he wasn't very attached to felt wrong. And then another idea, even bolder, emerged. What if she took him? At first the notion seemed absurd, too provocative. But the more she thought, the more it made sense, not as revenge, but as truth. Alex was her life. He was the most important part of who she was. Going without him would be presenting an incomplete version of herself. He wasn't a shameful secret to hide. He was her son, her greatest achievement, the living proof that what Michael tried to destroy had turned into something beautiful and strong. Taking him wasn't to rub it in Michael's face, but to affirm her own reality. This is my life. This is my son. We're fine. We're happy. She didn't plan any confrontation. In her mind, the scenario was simple. She'd enter discreetly, sit in the back, watch the ceremony from afar, and maybe leave before the reception even started. No one needed to know who she was. No one needed to know the boy by her side was the groom's son. They'd just be two more guests in the crowd. The universe, however, had a different script in mind, one involving a nervous bride, a forgotten bouquet, and a series of coincidences that would turn her silent arrival into the unexpected climax of a story that began 8 years before, with a door closing and a heart breaking. Olivia didn't know any of this as she chose an elegant, discreet dress and helped Alex tie his little bow tie. She was just preparing to close a chapter, unaware she was about to fling the whole book open for everyone to read. The wedding day dawned with a sky so clear and blue it seemed an affront to the storm brewing inside Olivia. She moved through the morning in a surreal calm, the quiet before major upheavals. She dressed Alex first, adjusting the little bow tie around his neck, her heart tightening with a mix of pride and anxiety. He looked handsome, a little gentleman whose eyes sparkled with excitement at going to a grown-up party. He had no idea of the symbolic weight his small hand, holding hers, would carry. For him, it was just an outing with Mom. For Olivia, it was the final march in a silent war she'd waged alone for nearly a decade. She chose an emerald green dress for herself, a color of renewal and serenity. It was elegant but understated, designed to blend into the crowd, not stand out. It was the perfect armor for the internal battle she'd fight. As they arrived at the church, an imposing structure of stone and stained glass, Olivia felt the first tremor of doubt. The sound of the organ flowing through the open doors, the chatter of well-dressed guests. It all seemed a world she didn't belong to. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, and looked at Alex. He looked back at her, a pure smile on his face, and squeezed her hand tighter. "Let's go, Mom," he asked, tugging her gently. That simple gesture, that unwavering trust, was the reinforcement she needed. She wasn't there as the abandoned ex-girlfriend. She was there as his mother, and a mother doesn't back down. They entered. The plan was to find a spot in the back pews, a safe, anonymous vantage point. But fate, with its penchant for dramatic twists, had other plans. As soon as they took their first steps down the marble aisle, a flustered woman with a headset, the wedding coordinator, rushed toward her. "Thank goodness! Where have you been?" she said, her voice tense with panic, without even looking properly at Olivia's face. Before Olivia could explain the misunderstanding, the woman continued. "Charlotte told me you'd come with your son. The ring bearer got sick, food poisoning, a disaster. Isabella is devastated, her bouquet." The woman stopped, finally focusing on Alex, who looked at her with curiosity. "He's perfect. Please, would you do me this favor? Save the day? It's just walk down the aisle, go to the altar, and hand the bouquet to the bride. Simple." Olivia froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. It was a trap of chance so perfect and so cruel it seemed scripted by a higher force. Refusing would raise suspicions, create an unwanted scene. Accepting meant putting her son, the living proof of Michael's secret, literally center stage under the spotlights, mere feet from the father who didn't know he existed. The church aisle, once a path to anonymous observation, transformed into a runway to the epicenter of her past. The coordinator, interpreting her silence as hesitation, clasped her hands in plea. "Please, Charlotte will be so grateful. The bride will be so happy." Charlotte's name, her client, The woman who'd invited her with such kindness sealed her decision. Refusing would be a slight to the one person there who'd shown her genuine goodness. In a trance, she heard herself agree. It all happened in a blur. The coordinator handed Alex a small pillow where the bouquet of white lilies and pale roses rested. She gave quick instructions to the boy, who listened with the seriousness of someone receiving the most important mission of his life. Olivia was told to wait near the door and enter right after his entrance, so she could collect him at the end of the aisle. The music shifted, a softer prelude signaling something was about to happen. The great church doors opened fully. And then Alex began to walk. Each step the boy took down the red-carpeted aisle was a drumbeat in the silence that had fallen. He walked with childish concentration, focused on not dropping the bouquet, oblivious to the hundreds of eyes fixed on him. Olivia followed at a respectful distance, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. She could feel the stares on her, the guests' curiosity wondering who this elegant woman accompanying the substitute ring-bearer was. But her eyes were fixed on just one person, Michael. At the altar, Michael Reynolds was frozen. The moment Alex entered, a vague confusion passed over his face. But as the boy approached, the confusion turned into a visible shockwave, a recognition that drained all color from his features. The eyes. They were his eyes. That small face was an echo of his own childhood photos. Time seemed to fold in on itself, and the 8 years of denial and deliberate forgetting crumbled in one devastating instant. He looked at the boy, and then, instinctively, his gaze swept the aisle, searching, and found Olivia. Their eyes met over the crowd, and in that second a universe of unspoken words, broken promises, and a lifetime of consequences passed between them. There was no triumph in Olivia's gaze, just a sad, resolute calm. There was pure panic in his. Alex reached the altar, oblivious to the emotional storm swirling around him. He stopped in front of the bride, Isabella, whose face was covered by a delicate veil. She bent down, a sweet smile on her lips, to take the bouquet. "Thank you, little angel." "You're a prince," she whispered. Alex, having completed his mission successfully, beamed with pride and, in an act of childish spontaneity, looked back toward Olivia, who now stood at the start of the front pews. With a clear, resonant voice that only a happy child possesses, a voice that cut through the church's silence like crystal, he exclaimed, "I did it, Mom. I didn't drop it." The word Mom echoed under the vaulted ceiling. It wasn't a whisper, it was a declaration. Every head in the hall, previously focused on the altar, turned in unison to follow the boy's gaze, landing on Olivia. The murmur started instantly, a wave of speculation and shock. Who was that woman? And why did the boy, who was the spitting image of the groom, call her Mom? Isabella, still smiling, froze. She looked from the boy to Michael, whose face was now a mask of pale horror, and then to the woman in green in the aisle. The confusion in her eyes gave way to a slow, terrible understanding. The silence that followed wasn't reverent. It was the dense, heavy silence of a scandal unfolding in real time, a silence that took over the church, suffocating the music, the prayers, and the manufactured happiness of that day. The silence that fell over the church wasn't empty. It was a vacuum filled with 1,000 unspoken questions, an abyss that opened in the middle of the aisle and swallowed all the rehearsed joy of that day. The word Mom, said in Alex's innocent voice, was the stone that started an avalanche. The guests, once mere spectators of a wedding, became the jury in an impromptu trial. Eyes darted from Olivia to Michael, then to little Alex, who remained at the altar, unaware of the devastation his simple word had caused. He was the piece connecting the puzzle, and now with the connection exposed under the sacred light of the stained glass, the full picture was undeniable and shocking. The resemblance between the boy and the groom, once a passing curiosity, now became irrefutable evidence. The murmur that followed was low but cutting, the sound of reputations unraveling and secrets being unearthed in real time. At the altar, time seemed to have shattered. Isabella, the bride, remained still for an instant that lasted an eternity. The bouquet of lilies trembled in her hand. Her gaze, once clouded by confusion, now burned with the icy clarity of betrayal. Not a betrayal of the flesh, but something deeper, more fundamental. a betrayal of a mission, the erasure of a past that completely defined the man she was about to marry. She looked at Michael, not for an explanation, but with the look of someone seeing a stranger for the first time. The man beside her, her future husband, her life partner, was a fraud. Their history, the foundation on which they'd built their future, was a lie. Michael, for his part, was catatonic. His face was a blank canvas where panic and shame waged war. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. What explanation could there be? What words could mend the reality that had just shattered at his feet? It was Olivia who broke the spell. With a calm that no one in the room, not even her, knew she possessed, she stepped forward. She walked down the aisle, not in haste, but with deliberate dignity. Every step was watched by hundreds of eyes. She didn't look at Michael. She didn't look at the betrayed bride. Her eyes were fixed only on her son. Reaching the altar, she knelt in front of Alex, ignoring the drama unfolding around her. She smiled at him, a genuine and reassuring smile, and straightened his bow tie, which had gotten a bit crooked. "You were amazing, my love," she whispered, her voice audible only to him. "Now let's find our seat, okay?" She took his small hand, stood up, and without a single glance at the shattered couple at the altar, turned and began walking back down the aisle. Her retreat was as powerful as her arrival. There were no shouts, no accusations, not a single word directed at Michael. She didn't need any. Her action, her silence, her unshakable dignity were a verdict more eloquent than any speech. As she walked out of the church, hand in hand with the son who was living proof of everything, she wasn't fleeing. She was freeing herself. She was closing the final chapter, not with a bang, but with the silent force of someone who knows her own worth. Passing through the doors and feeling the fresh air on her face, she didn't feel the triumph of revenge. She felt peace. A deep, exhausted peace, the peace that comes after a long and arduous journey. Inside the church, controlled chaos erupted. Isabella let the bouquet fall to the floor, the white and pink flowers scattered across the marble like tears. In a whisper, heard by everyone in the front pews, she said to Michael, "It's over." And then, with a composure no one expected, she lifted her veil, turned to the stunned crowd, and walked out of the church through the side door, leaving Michael alone at the altar, a groom without a bride, a dethroned king in his own castle of lies. What followed were echoes. The wedding was cancelled, obviously. The story spread through the city like wildfire on dry grass, fueled by high society gossip. Michael Reynolds, the brilliant lawyer, the golden heir, became a pariah. His colleagues looked at him with a mix of pity and contempt. Isabella's parents used all their influence to ensure his once meteoric career stagnated in a swamp of minor cases and closed doors. He lost the bride, the respect, and most importantly, the immaculate image he'd spent his life building. He tried to contact Olivia, sending messages, emails, even showing up at her salon. She never responded. She instructed him to communicate only through a lawyer for matters related to child support and formal acknowledgement of Alex. She didn't want his money, but she wanted her son to have what was his by right, a name on paper, a legal formality that Michael was now forced to fulfill under public scrutiny. Olivia, on the other hand, found a new kind of notoriety. Some saw her as a homewrecker, a vengeful woman. But most, especially the women who frequented her salon and knew fragments of her story, saw her as a silent heroine. Her business prospered even more, not because of the scandal, but despite it. People were drawn to her strength, her refusal to become the star of a vulgar drama. She remained as she always was, professional, discreet, focused on her work and her son. Her life didn't change. She didn't need it to. It was already complete before that day in the church. Months later, on a quiet afternoon while watching Alex play soccer in the park, Olivia reflected on it all. She felt no joy in Michael's fall. She felt only a distant melancholy for the waste, for the weakness of a man who had so much, and chose the path of cowardice. Her intention had never been to destroy him. Truth, however, has its own force, its own gravity. She just stopped hiding from it. She allowed the truth to exist, to take up space in the world. The rest was just consequence. That day in the church wasn't an act of war. It was the simple presentation of a fact. Her presence wasn't an attack, it was the affirmation of her existence. Some presences aren't revenge, they're justice in silence. What did you think of this story? On a scale of 0 to 10, what score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get all our stories. And click here to watch another amazing story. Thanks and see you next time.